One of the greatest dangers, I think, in the Christian life is limiting our expectations of Jesus to our understanding of Jesus. Right? We all have different experiences. Same God, same Jesus, same Lord, but often we've experienced him in different ways. And sometimes it's hard to think that God may work in a different way. For instance, there are those who have come to faith, a trusting relationship with Christ, who have profound experience with Jesus and have given their lives to him as they sat in chairs with a band on stage and sang words on a screen written in contemporary worship. There are those who have had a profound experience with Christ and have come to a lasting relationship with him as they sat in pews and had an organ play hymns and read out a hymnal. There are those who have come to a lasting relationship, true relationship with the living God, sitting in a village in Africa. And there are those who have come to a relationship with Christ as gospel music played in an organ. Right? Often we limit, the danger is for us to limit our understanding of, I came to Jesus this way. I had a profound experience. This is how I have experienced and know that Jesus is the Lord. And sometimes we think this is the best way or the only way. And we limit who God is and how God works by our own understanding. It happens as we do youth and other ministries, right? I know that those who have gone to Army, like our youth have gone to, and have dedicated their life to Christ and felt a call to ministry while they were sleeping on the floor and building wheelchair ramps and doing everything they do at Army. It is an awesome event. I know those who have met Jesus at church camp because church camp changes lives. I know those who have had those experiences at Emmaus. But the danger is thinking that it's church camp or it's Emmaus or it's Army that makes the difference. When it's the living God who meets us in those places. Jesus is always bigger than our understanding. And sometimes we have that tendency to limit what God can do. And maybe this is the question that we need to ask, is can Jesus be more than I thought he was? Can Jesus be more than I thought he was? And I think this is the question that the disciples are wrestling with today in our scripture. The disciples are wrestling with this, and it kind of blows their minds of what happened. So I want to jump in to Jesus walking on the water, and this is verse 22. This is Matthew 14:22. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. And later that night, he was there alone. And the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. So let's stop there. Leave it right there. Right, so what's happened? Remember last week we talked about Jesus feeding the 5,000, right? The disciples were part of that. They brought the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and multiplied it. But why were they there? It's because Jesus had originally said, hey, he had just learned that John the Baptist had been crucified, had been killed, beheaded, right? And Jesus said, hey, let's go spend some time alone. And so they go to the other side of the lake, but by the time they get there, the crowds are already there, and Jesus kind of has compassion on them and teaches them. And he teaches them until way in the evening, and it's past lunchtime and past dinner time. And so the disciples are like, where are we going to find something to eat? And so Jesus multiplies the fish, and they feed 5,000 people. So that's everything that's happened up in there. Can you imagine how tired they must be? How worn out, how in awe and wonder of what God has done, but still they're like, we need a break. And so Jesus says, hey, why don't y'all go ahead and I'll catch up later. Right? He says, go on ahead, meaning there's an idea that Jesus is going to come. And so they get in the boat and they go out and there's wind and there's waves. Buffeted, that's a interesting word. It gets this idea of just being the waves just beating up against the boat. Like they go, 3 steps forward and 4 steps back. And so there they are. They know Jesus. They've been with him, but listen to what happens. It says, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. They didn't recognize Jesus. All they saw in their tired, weary, mist flying everywhere and stuff is they went back to their concepts of, we know who Jesus is. And we know what Jesus can do, and that can't be. We don't know what it is. That word phantasma is the word that's used there for it's a ghost. It's where we get the word phantom from. And it's really this category of we don't know. We know it's some sort of figure, but we don't know what it is. And it says they were terrified. Because Jesus wasn't fitting into their idea of what Jesus could do, was he? You look in Job. In Job, there's this talking about who God is. And this comes from Job 9 in verse 7. It says, he speaks the sun and it does not shine. Talk about the power of God, right? He speaks to the sun and it does not shine. He seals off the light of the stars. He alone stretches out the heavens, and treads on the waves of the sea. It's only something God can do. And they're just figuring out who Jesus is, and this doesn't match their understanding of what God can do because it's outside of their knowledge. I went on a mission trip to Bolivia. I told some of y'all about this, and we went there, and we went to do mission work. And so we arrive in through the planes and stuff, and we get down, and the first day we go and we visit a restaurant in town. That was going to be our place we ate for the week. And the second day we went out to a farm that was growing food. And the third day we went into the village and we hung out with the kids. And the whole time we were wondering, this is great and this is fun, but when are we going to do mission work? Because my idea and our idea of mission work was like UM Army, right? We want to build something. We want to dig something. We want to place something. We want to do something. What we didn't know, and they told us after a while, they did finally come up with something for us to do. We were doing fence posts, and we would get one done, and the guy who was our guide there had 12 of them done. We were like, okay, we understand why they're not having us work. What we were there to do was to build relationships because the missions organization we were with had lined up teams to come for the next year. But we were the first one. This was the first group in that town in Bolivia. And we were there to say, hey, this is a group that can be trusted. And so we were there to build relationships. But in our mind, we weren't doing it because that was outside of we thought what we were supposed to be doing and what God had called us to do. And it was showing us that there's something different. Limited understanding doesn't limit what God's doing, but it does limit sometimes our ability to recognize it. So I told you when we started, if you came in, there's fill in the blanks on your handout. So here's the first one. We often limit our expectations of Jesus by the limits of our understanding of what Jesus can do. Maybe God is doing something different that we don't recognize, but it doesn't mean it's not God doing something. The story continues. Matthew 14, 27 to 28. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied. He's like the first one to answer, right? "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." So there they are. The wind's going, everything going on. Jesus doesn't stop the storm, right? Isn't that what we want him to do? God, if it's you, why don't you take care of the storm first and then we'll talk? Why don't you take care of whatever it is I'm dealing with, whatever trouble in my life, whatever's brewing, whatever's going on, take care of that. And Jesus doesn't take care of the storm. Jesus says, "Take courage, it is I." You don't really have to tell someone to take courage if there's nothing to be afraid of, do you? But in the midst of the storm, Jesus says, "Take courage, I am here." From the same phrase where we get, I am the Lord your God. I am. Take courage, it is I. But God, what I want you to do, and maybe this is you, I want you to tell me the whole plan and lay it all out so I know. And he doesn't work that way. He shows up in the water. "Lord, take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." Storm still raging, but at least they know who it is. They know that it's Jesus. And Peter says, "Lord, if it's you, then command me to come out." Now, often we think that this is Peter testing Jesus. And it's really not. If you read the verbs, you get in, you look at the Greek, it's not him testing Jesus. It's Peter saying, "Lord, you're doing something amazing. And if it's you, I want to be a part of that. God, you're doing something I don't understand. I don't understand it. I don't comprehend it. It doesn't make sense. But if it's you, then I want to be a part of what you are doing." Often we say, "God, I don't understand that, so let somebody else deal with that." "God, I don't comprehend what you're doing over there, so surely that's for somebody else to do." And Peter says, "No, I don't care." He says, "If it's you, if you are working, if you are doing something amazing, I want to be in your presence. Lord, tell me to come." And what does Jesus say? Come. Is that what we would say? I don't know, because I think some of us are comfortable to be in the boat and know about Jesus and to see Jesus and to see that Jesus is doing wonderful things over here in this ministry and go, "That's great, awesome, that's good." Or to see that God's working in some different way and say, "I don't understand it, so good, that's great, I can admire it from here." Where is it that God is saying to you, "I'm doing something different that you don't know. I'm working through a worship service that you don't like. I'm doing through a small group that you think is frivolous. I'm doing something great through this growth group or this ministry, or not even at the church, out in the community. I'm doing something, and it doesn't look like church, and it doesn't fit into your preconceived notions of what church should look like." And often we will look at it and go, "That's for somebody else." Not Peter. Peter says, "God, if you're doing it, I want to be there. Tell me to come." And he steps out and does it. Often we're content to know about, not experience. The story of a tightrope walker. Famous back in the 20s or 30s, I can't remember when it was, but he stretched a rope or a cable, I'm hoping, across Niagara Falls, and he was going to do his tightrope thing. And so he gets on one side, and big crowd, and he says, "Hey, how many of y'all think I can walk across there?" And everybody goes, "Yes, you can do it." And so he does it, and he comes back. Then he says, "How many of y'all think I could push a wheelbarrow across there?" And of course, they're like, "Yeah, it's great, you can do it." And so they have faith that he can do it. And so he pushes the wheelbarrow across and brings it back, and they all cheer and go crazy. He says, how many of y'all think I could put a wheelbarrow and put 180 pounds of bricks and push it across? And of course, they thought that was phenomenal. And they just started cheering and yelling and chanting, you can do it. And so he does. He pushes it across and he brings it back. And they all go ecstatic. And he goes, finally, how many of y'all think I could put a person weighing approximately 150 to 180 pounds in the wheelbarrow and push it across and bring it back? And they just go ballistic. Like they are just like, yeah, you can do it. And he says, okay, who's going to volunteer? Are we content knowing Jesus can do something? And content staying in the boat and watching? Not Peter. Peter would be in that wheelbarrow. Peter would tell a story about how he can trust, what he can do. Discipleship Jesus calls us to trust him before we understand. Jesus calls us to trust before we understand. We left off the scripture and Peter says, tell me to come. And Jesus says, come. And what does Peter do? Verse 29, come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. Just submit verse 29. Go back to verse 29. Note that before we go on. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water. Verse 30, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, why did you doubt? When he climbed back in the boat, then the wind died down, of course. And then those who were with him in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Peter steps out of the boat in obedience and walks on water. A lot of times we skip the fact that Peter sank, but we forget that Peter did it. Jesus called him, he kept his eyes on Jesus, and he got both feet out of the boat, and he started walking on the water. He was doing what he shouldn't be able to do. Friends, Jesus calls us to do things that we don't think we can do. But he kept his eyes focused on Jesus. He did it. And then it says what? He noticed the wind. Any old school cartoon people here? Like Wile E. Coyote, Bugs Bunny, all of those, right? There's about a third of the group. It's like, we know what you're talking about. For everybody else, go watch it. But there was this cartoon called, the first service, they were like, we know what you're doing. I have to explain it a little bit here. There was this cartoon called Roadrunner and Coyote. I think there's a movie actually coming out. Roadrunner and Coyote. And they had this running gag where the Roadrunner would go and he would run across this cliff, right? There's a cliff on one side, on the other side, and a big chasm, and he would run straight across it with no problem. And then the Coyote was coming behind him, and he would run. And the Coyote would get halfway across, and he would sit there, halfway across, chasm underneath him. My theory is that cartoon logic states that he would have stayed there indefinitely, suspended, until he does what? He takes one little toe and he dinks it over. You hear that dink, dink, dink. And he realizes that he can't be doing what he's doing. He probably could have walked across without that. But he realizes that he can't be doing what he's doing. Peter steps out of the boat and he steps there and he is walking towards Jesus. And then all of a sudden, he notices the wind. Now, if I am looking at John and I'm staring at John, but I notice Lucas, how can I notice Lucas? I have to take my eyes off of John and look at Lucas. He took his eyes off of Jesus, the one who had called him to step out, and he took his eyes off and he noticed the wind. Friends, when we step out in faith and follow Jesus and go where he's called, there's a lot of wind out there, isn't it? There's the wind of people who are against you, who want you to fail, and you will hear their voices. You shouldn't be doing that. That's crazy. Why in the world are you doing that? Why are you taking time off on a Sunday and going to church instead of relaxing and going to the lake? Why do you volunteer to teach 3-year-olds? Really? Why do you step into this ministry? Why are you the way you are? But there are also people who are well-intentioned, friends, family, coworkers, who are also can be that winds too, who can pull your focus off of Jesus. Are you sure you want to be a missionary? Have you thought about your family? Are you sure you want to be a pastor? Are you sure you want to work at a church? Are you sure you want to spend that much time? Well-intentioned sometimes are the voices of the wind. Peter focuses on the wind and on the people in our story. He takes his eyes off Jesus and he sinks. And he cries, "Lord, save me." Now, I've preached this passage many times, but it didn't occur to me that Peter sinking and failing did not change his faith in Jesus. Because he says, "Lord Jesus, save me. Even though I've pulled away, even though I've turned away, I know that you can help me." And Jesus picks him up by the scruff of his neck and puts him back. That's how I imagine it. Pick him up, put him back on the boat. And it says that the wind died down. Obviously, that's when it would die down. The wind dies down, and the disciples worship him. Why did the disciples worship Jesus? It may be because Jesus revealed that he was God, like he revealed more about him because he was walking on water, and that was only something God could do. It could be that because Jesus picked up Peter and put him out back on the boat, that he saved him, and Jesus is able to do that. I may be alone, but I think the disciples worshiped Jesus not because Peter sank, not because Peter stayed on the water, but because Peter stepped. That he says, "I trust that you are my Lord, and I will go wherever you ask me to go." And he stepped out of the boat and walked on water. And the disciples may have looked at that and said, "You know what? If he can trust him, I can do that too." Friends, God may be calling you to step out into a ministry, into an opportunity to have a conversation, to some expression of your faith and trust in him. And it may not depend on your success. It may depend on your trust. Discipleship moves us from knowing about Jesus to discovering who he is, to stepping out of faith, on faith, taking that risk. God will do extraordinary things through people who are willing to trust and follow, even when they don't have the full picture. The question is, are you willing? So I want to read a couple statements. I want you to just think about these. Are we willing to imagine that God might be working in ways that we could never imagine, that we could never comprehend? Through services, through ministries, through opportunities that aren't even on our radar. Are we willing to acknowledge that God can work through people that we would never expect, that we wouldn't choose, but God can? Are we willing to move beyond our comfort zones, to step out of the boat and keep our eyes on Jesus? And are we willing to step when Jesus says, come? Friends, God is working in this world beyond our understanding, but invites us to join in helping to bring about the kingdom of heaven on earth. But it's not going to happen in our comfort zones. It's not going to happen in our preconceived ideas of how God works. It's going to happen when we step into those places that He is at work and we trust. So your last question, and this is the one I want you to think about. I'm going to go ahead and have the band come back up. The question is this: where is Jesus asking you to step beyond your understanding and trust Him?